I'm going to just introduce our panelists before I step into the moderator circle here. So Frimet Goldberger is an award-winning journalist and an essayist, a part-time procrastinator, she says, and a full-time mother of 2 teens who occasionally think she's an okay person. Frimet has written widely about the growing up in the insular Hasidic community of Kiryas Joel and ultimately leaving with her husband and children. Her op-eds and investigative stories and radio investigations have appeared at the CNN, The Forward, Haaretz, Electric Lit, PRI's The World, BBC News Service, and more. You might also have known Frimet as the babka lady. So get him while they last. She might be retiring now because she's returning for her MFA in creative writing in 2020. And we wish her a lot of success as she's recently been solicited by a literary agency for her book, and she jokes that you should look out for that in 2080. Rabbi Ysoscher Katz, who's the chair of the Talmud department at Chovevei Torah, is also a senior part-time, no, that's old information. Great. So Rabbi Katz Ysoscher studied at the Satmar Brisk and Beit Yosef Yeshivot, and received smicha shortly after high school. He's taught Talmud at a Talmud and Halacha, Jewish law at a wide array of institutions. He's been the Judaic Studies coordinator for schools including Loria School, Mayanot, SAR, and the Ramaz High Schools, and has taken up a number of public speaking, responsa writing, and other important pieces for publication in The Forward, the Jerusalem Post, and the Times of Israel, and more. Rae Lipkind, whose name is not Lipkind. We're missing the Rae there, so excuse us for that error. Is the community engagement coordinator at Footsteps. Rae is a facilitator, a friend, a sibling, a nurturer, a youth worker, a defender, an organizer, and a former Chabadnik who is a gender fluid queer person. They've been an active Footsteps member for over 5 years and on the Footsteps staff for 2. In their current role as community engagement coordinator, they work to create spaces where all members feel safe and experience healing through joy. Yeah. Hashtag bring the joy. Abby Stein. Abby Stein is a 10th generation descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. In 2015, Stein came out as a woman, and she now works as a trans activist. She has gotten involved in numerous activism platforms, including serving on the steering committee of the Women's March in DC. She was named by both the Jewish Week as a 36 under 36er and the Forward as a top 50 most influential American Jews. Her first book, Becoming Eve, My Journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgender Woman, was recently published by Seal Press. So welcome, please a great warm welcome for our panel. And just to frame the panel a little bit for folks, so what are we talking about here and why? Today we're going to explore the shifts in the ultra-Orthodox community since Footsteps founding about 15 years ago and more, and consider the impact on those and of those seeking to build self-determined lives. So that is the general gist of what we're talking about here today, and I am going to shift into my seat for the question piece of the conversation. So, hi everyone. Thanks for being here in conversation with us this late in the day. This opening question is for each of you to consider. Ysoscher, you've been out for about 20 years. Frimet for 10, Abby for 7, and Rae for 6. I don't think we did the seating on purpose, but that was excellent. We were wondering about the symbolism of the seating, so we can read into it in different ways. So I think that, what I am most curious to hear about from each of your perspectives is how you think the ultra-Orthodox community has changed since the time you left. And I know that leaving is not a linear process or a momentary process, and so interpret that as you will. But I will ask if you have a particular anecdote of the way that someone or something happened to you when you left, and an imagination of what that reaction might be today. That could be a good way of framing this, or any other way you choose to answer this question. Why don't we go back in time for this one and just come down the line here? So Ysoscher.
So like you mentioned, like Lani mentioned, I left roughly about 20 years ago or so. Well, by the time I left, I was already 30 years or so, and I was established in the community. I had a family, I had children. I taught in the community. The transition was a long process, as Lani said. I shouldn't say nobody. I didn't have a moment of when I woke up and said, okay, this is it, I'm out of here. It's a long process, it's a complicated process, as I'm sure many who have experienced this know. By the time I managed to leave, I also divorced at the time, and at that time, both of these things were unheard of in every possible way. I was terrified about leaving. I was, debating it for months and months and months and months. I was terrified about divorcing. I didn't know at the time any friends who were divorced. And I also had a position in the community. I was at the time a pretty well-known teacher in the community, I would say. And at the time, I was totally vilified. I lost all my friends. I lost all my contacts, especially the people who you'd come to my class. I would teach an evening class, and they were, horrified, disappointed, felt cheated. And it was hard. It was a hard transition. I remember just, when I eventually remarried and I moved to the Upper West Side. And, of course I didn't continue wearing my clothing, the garb and everything else. But I was so terrified of even letting on that I changed my clothing that when a friend would ask, so I would say, I live in the Upper West Side, they would say, so do you still wear your shtreimel? And I would say, why not? I wouldn't want to lie, but I wouldn't want to admit, so now you think whatever you want. 30 years later, and things have changed dramatically. It's funny how I went from the villain in the community to someone of a person that people turn for advice. I mean, my story is one that I didn't leave Orthodoxy completely. I left ultra-Orthodoxy, but I still identify as a variation of Orthodox in one way or the other. And one can talk about why it is that there are very few people who leave ultra-Orthodoxy and choose a variation of observance thereof. But I would get, I'd get on average calls about once or twice a week of parents who would say, my child is leaving, could you tell me how I can help them leave in the way that you left? And in that, as if there's a way to replicate that. But what's nice for me is that all of a sudden those people who looked at me as a villain and ostracized me at the time, some are coming around, and aside from everything else emotionally, it feels nice. It's hard to kind of cut relationships, cut connections, and that has changed dramatically in the last 30 years.
Yeah, there is another one. So I can speak more broadly about the tectonic shifts that I've observed in the Orthodox community in general, but I want to zoom in on the Hasidic community, and specifically the community I was raised in Kiryas Ya'arim. So what I've observed over the last 10 years being out of the community, kind of from my armchair, is that there is a generational disparity in dealing with defectors. I wouldn't even call them defectors because there's a growing awareness that children might veer from their parents' beaten path. And what that awareness has has allowed is, it's kind of stripped the stigma and the isolation that parents feel when they have children who have left the community. So, to give you an example, growing up on my street of 48 families in a tight cul-de-sac, there was one person who became a goy. We called him a goy because that's the only language we knew. It's no longer a novelty now. If you go around, 10 years ago when my husband and I left, I was the second one on that street, maybe the third, but you go around in Kiryas Joel right now and you'll find at least one disillusioned, one curious adolescent who may or may not be acting on their curiosity in every household, in every other household. So the numbers are definitely growing. And as a result of the numbers growing, and this no longer being a novelty, someone leaving is no longer as scandalous. So it doesn't oil the gossip mills anymore in the way that when I left, I was still scrutinized for choosing to go to college, for driving. Everything that I did was overly scrutinized. And that's no longer the case, not to the extent that it was 10 years ago. I mean, sure, if you say that so-and-so is wearing pants, that's still like wild entertainment. But it no longer has that same sort of shock value.
I actually want to start, if I may, by thanking you two. Because both of you, Frimet and Ysoscher, were to me, for you I didn't know much, other than I didn't know the fact that my grandfather kicked you out of yeshiva. Which is a legitimate thing, which actually happened. But I do remember your name coming up here and there as a terrible person. Usually as a terrible person. And Frimet, with you, I don't think I heard about you. I didn't go to Yeshiva Satmar. I didn't know Satmar that well. But I only started seeing you as I started sneaking online. And I think that was the time. It was a video or a documentary or something around I'm not digging them up, but they were out there at the time, and they were really helping me. So first of all, thank you both. And I think that was very powerful. For me personally, and I think we're going to talk later a bit more about what you touched a bit about on the journey of people who are leaving, the journey people taking, and I have had for myself between 2012 and where I'm now, both the ability to do that and the way the community treats people who are kind of staying engaged with a certain form of Judaism. Personally though, and I think similar to a lot of people back in the 90s or the early 2000s, I didn't know any other people who have left. Then when I was, I believe my early teens, there was the first person in my extended family who left the community. Many of you know him, he was one of us, Luz Tversky. He was the first one in my family. And the stories that went along with that were mind-boggling. Everything from he's a criminal, mentally ill, crazy, about tabanik, how do you translate that? Someone who just very lustful and gives in to all of their earthly needs, whatever. It came attached with a lot of negativity and ultimately a message of we can be a part of that, and no one in the family ever spoke to him again. When I left, just a few years later, and it was a process, but by the time I told my parents that I'm not religious, their response wasn't the same that it was in my own family just a few years before that. And my dad told me, I think you're sick and it's like you have cancer, but I'm not gonna reject my child because they're sick. Which I think is a messed up answer for parents to give, but in reality, that was already nice. And my parents actually tried to help me when I got divorced, mostly because they were hoping that if they help me, I will come back or stay religious in some ways. But they did not shun me. And a big part of that was because I wasn't the first one in the family to leave. And I think the part where that really changed was when I came out. So I came out as trans 3 years after I left. And that was the time, and that was a bit more than 4 years ago, and that was the time that my dad told me, I can never talk to you again. And it wasn't for religious reasons. He made it very clear. I don't care about religious parts. It's something that no one is going to understand. It's something that no one around me knows anything about. And what struck me at the time was that it became very clear that so much that has changed in the community, and I'm not saying it's the only thing that changed, but a lot of it has been, there are just so many. I mean, by the time I left, there was already a few in my family, and by now almost every family that I know has a child here and there that has left. But when it came to the LGBTQ part, then he was like, oh, then he is like where they were in the 90s, when people left in the 90s. And to me, that has been actually very striking and kind of an example of, I sometimes say that I'm a bit selfish when I talk about LGBTQ and like trans activism, and I was the first person to have grown up Hasidic to come out as trans. There have been a few more people since that came out, and I think that is actually helping me. The reality is that some of my siblings are like, oh, you're not the only one. And at the end of the day, hopefully in a few years, we'll even there be where we are with people leaving. But that is what I personally experienced in that shift.
Good. Oh, this might work too, cool. So I do want to start out by saying, like, as Lani introduced, I work for Footsteps, but for these purposes, I will be speaking from my personal experience, not as a Footsteps staff person, but as a member. And also, obviously, using my experience and knowledge that I've gained as a staff person to inform that. So, jumping in, I don't know how much the community has changed, actually. I do agree with what you've all said about folks who come before us who are making it easier. Those folks, for me, that's you all, which I'm grateful for. I think that visibility is incredibly important, and it makes it so that people are able to have a little bit more stability along the way. For me, I'm the 9th in 10 children, and a lot of my siblings left before I did, and it meant that I was able to stay at home when I made it clear that I no longer wanted to be religious, which was really, really stabilizing. Also, it was destabilizing in a lot of ways because it made it so that I was living inside of a world that I was trying to choose to leave at the same time. So it was very confusing. I think also something that needs to be said of how the community has changed. Yes, our community of folks who leave, we've gotten stronger, but what has the Hasidic community done? What is all of the Hasidic communities done? They've also gotten stronger. They've also found better ways to fight us, to try and tear our families apart, to come after us in different ways that are more harmful than in the past. And so that needs to be named as well.
Thanks all of you for sharing that perspective. As we were preparing for this conversation, and as we at Footsteps have been sort of exploring this question in the last 6 months or so as we're coming up on a new strategic plan, the word porousness has been used a bunch. That specifically the Hasidic community has become increasingly porous. And I'm curious, for those of you for whom this question resonates, like, 2 of you could answer, it doesn't have to be all of you. What does that look like? Do you agree? And what's the impact on that? And I don't know who wants to start here, but if you're okay.
So, yeah, I call this the okay boomer effect. It's just trying to be relevant. Okay boomer.
Is that okay boomer?
Yes, okay.
So not
boomer
on social media.
Yeah, okay. You're clearly not on the gram.
Okay.
It's the complete dissociation of the younger generation and the boomers and the powers that be, the rabbis, the leaders, the ba'adatznias, what have you. They are the ones.
What's the ba'adatznias?
The Va'adat Tznius is basically a modesty committee tasked with maintaining the highest standards of modesty in the community. I don't know if it doesn't exist in all ultra-Orthodox communities. It absolutely exists in most Hasidic communities. Definitely in Kiryat, where I grew up. In fact, the Va'adat Tznius excommunicated us, or threw my son out of the school because I didn't shave my head, but that's a story for another time. So they keep building higher and thicker walls to keep the secular influences out. They ban the smartphones, they ban the internet, they keep radicalizing, and the younger generation is like, okay, boomer, get out of here, we're not. I mean, of course, they're not outright rebelling, but I'm seeing the beginning stirrings of discontent with the younger generation. And I think that what that is creating is kind of this ripple effect with where more people are leaving, and there is a greater awareness that people will leave. To give you a personal example, one of my sisters has a son who is, I like to call him OTD light. He's not fully OTD, but he kind of shaved off his payas, and they sent him to Israel for a while to kind of straighten him out, Anyway, he's back home now, and I had a recent conversation with her, and she's the least likely to have a candid conversation with anyone about anything personal. But we were at a Shaver Brachas, which is celebration after a wedding for the uninitiated. And I had an opportunity to talk one-on-one with her, and so I asked her about her son and how he's doing, and she spoke so lovingly of him and of the fact that he's home and that he enjoys spending time with his siblings, and his siblings love having him home. And I was so impressed, and I told her, I'm really impressed with the way you're handling this. This wouldn't have happened 10 years ago when I left. And so she mentioned, this guy, Abby Fishoff, and I know he's controversial. We can talk about his, the controversy surrounding.
We're getting there.
Yeah. So he runs this organization called Twisted Parenting, where he tries to get parents to acknowledge that children deserve unconditional love with, certain conditions. But he has had a tremendous impact on people like my sister and her husband and her family. And she's been trying to get other parents on board with this idea of unconditional love, accepting your children. And, how does this relate? Yeah, I think it's the
example of the porousness.
The porousness of, more people leaving, and then also the smartphones and the internet being banned, but the younger generation is finding a way how to access it and how to have like a second phone, where you have the phone that's for the public and the other phone that you can use, in the safe confines of your home. But also the more individuals that leave, the more, and the fact that they are somewhat accepted by their parents, and that they live at home, it allows their siblings to see parts of the outside, elements of the outside, and to see that this, maybe it's something I would like to do as well.
I'm going to do Rae, and then Ysoscher, and then Abby. Everyone has something to say on this. There's what we've seen is that people come down on different sides of the impact of the porousness. So we're going to try to keep comments to possibly 2 or 3 minutes each on this one, because we could be here all night.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lani. So to speak to the porousness, especially the type that you were naming from it, I think it's incredibly harmful for people to exist in a space where they are somewhat accepted. when I was talking about people having representation of people who have left and are, you know, living their lives the way they choose to live them, and that being something that us younger folks can look up to and can see as something to achieve. It is incredibly confusing to witness people showing up as half of themselves, to have that as an image to look up to. I'm naming this as from personal experience. My siblings were accepted somewhat. My siblings would show up in drag, you know, wearing the clothes that my parents preferred them to wear, but not the clothes that they chose to wear. So I was able to witness a semblance of freedom, and when it came time for me to actually initiate that into my life, I was in emotional turmoil of not understanding why, like, there was an unhappiness there, why I had felt like I had to meet expectations, why, you know, I couldn't just be all of me. And I think that's the harmfulness of the porousness, and that's, you know, a lot of the way that the shift in mindset of warfare, for lack of a better word, of the Hasidic community is at right now. They're in a space of ideological warfare, you know, because it used to be that you would kick your child out, you would excommunicate your child, you would never speak to your child again. Now, you show them unconditional, conditional love, which is confusing. It's confusing, it's manipulative, and it is not conducive to somebody accessing liberation for themselves, which is what we all want.
Heavy stuff, and this is complicated. So thanks. Let's keep breathing and try to listen to understand before jumping to the butts in our head. So Ysoscher and then Abby.
Right. I do want to pick up on what Rae mentioned, but I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, so I'll come back to that. Just in terms of the porousness, I just want to piggyback on what Frimet said, which is, you know, the obvious fact, but I think it's important to name, which is, you know, the thing that maintained the Haredi community for so many years was basically they created this virtual ghetto. It was a wall-less ghetto that kept people inside because people knew that if you go outside, it's going to be so consequential and so dangerous, and, you know, it's a world full of typhus, you know, of lust and perversion, and God forbid if you walk out there. And then the internet was born, and the internet penetrated those walls. You can stay inside, you can be in shul, you can be in kollel, and find out everything that goes on in the world out there. And I think that really has been the biggest difference in terms of the last couple of years. I mean, there are so many WhatsApp groups, there's so many internet groups, and so many different kinds of communication that people have thanks to the internet. So you can be a housewife at home and still have contact with the entire world out there. So I think that's a big factor in the porousness. The other thing that I have to say is, for those of you who know me, I'm out there, I've been around, and, you know, I have people who have made it their life's, you know, job to rip me apart and bring me down. As a matter of fact, there's this guy out there, or some of you might know who I'm talking about, who, when he writes columns critiquing me, he puts my name in the title, which took me time to figure out that the point is that way anybody who Googles me will right away come up to that, with those essays, which is, what I didn't realize is that for every 2 people who read that essay and say, oh, he's a horrible guy, there is one person who said, that sounds interesting, I would like to find out who he is. And I cannot tell you, I'm not kidding. I mean, there's this Facebook group that some of you might know, who's, this guy's really also out to rip me apart. I mean, if I can put in a plug, I've done a lot of work with that LGBTQ community. I would say most of my LGBT contact in the ultra-Orthodox community comes from those bashing essays, from those bashing Facebook groups. And incredibly good, and I feel, it took me a while to come to appreciate how much it really is something that we would cherish and pursue. Now I'm writing really provocative things because I want to get another essay out there against me, and it works most of the time. He thinks my bait.
Thanks, Ysoscher. Abby?
The porousness, the question.
Oh, you're trying to come back next time to talk for
Double-edged sword. Just go
I want to. Is this working? Yes. Okay. I want to specifically get what Frimet said about all of you, and is the community getting more open? And I have a yes and a yes but. Yes and to the extent that some people are becoming more open. I have a brother. There's no name for it really, but I like to call it modern Hasidic. Something that a lot of us would call tuna bagels. I'm not going to explain it right now. Those who know, you know. If not, imagine some form of modern Hasidic. Who is online, has Facebook, openly, like not hiding, does his own thing, and everyone knows it. He used to be the black sheep in my family until I left, and then he's like, now he's a tzaddik, he's amazing, yes. He does his own thing, and I wouldn't even say he gets away with it. He is fully doing it, and my parents by now know that there's nothing that they can tell him that it's gonna make him change. And they do have some form of an unconditional love in the sense of they know that there is nothing that he is gonna do that is gonna be a red line for them. I do believe that there's no such a thing as unconditional love with conditions. It doesn't exist. It's not love. The same thing, I have a cousin in Williamsburg who started, like, for the first time ever, like, until a few years ago, they had control when it came to the internet. Everyone who wanted to send their kids at least had to nominally sign a letter that they have no internet at home. Obviously, people lied, but that was what everyone had to do. Until he started his own, like, boys' school and girls' school and yeshiva, and now people can get away with a lot, and that has definitely changed. But at the same time, a lot of people in the community are becoming a lot more radical. And I can talk to Satmar, and the only people from Satmar that I interact with are becoming more open. But I see it in Vishnitz, where I grew up, and in Square and other communities, where Square specifically is not a virtual ghetto, it's a literal ghetto, but actual gates, and they are becoming more radical. The way they treat the internet is some examples, but there are so many examples. It is becoming more radical. So I think, yes, there are parts that are becoming more open, and partially as a response to that. And ultimately, I think it will take a lot more anthropological research, but I think there's a paradigm shift happening. I don't know if we'll talk about that more later. I think there is a split coming. I don't know when, but similar to where like Orthodoxy became ultra-Orthodoxy, modern Orthodoxy, obviously it was a very different environment, very different circumstances, but I do believe the Hasidic community specifically, it's a matter of time that it is going to be split. And after a few decades, it's going to be formalized, where you're going to have people moving to the right and people moving to the left. Now, the downside that I've seen of that is that there is a lot of almost diversity in a weird and twisted way, where you can do certain things and almost get away with it, which ultimately puts sometimes more pressure, both of like, why do you have to go all the way when you could go to college? When 20 years ago, if you went to college, your parents would shun you, but now they might not. So why do you have to fully leave? In one way, but also I really love what you were saying, where it ends up being to a point where, yes, we'll love you up to a certain point, and then you have to check certain identities at the door. If you'll allow me for a second, I want to mention, so I joined the Women's March National Board last year. It was extremely controversial. I joined a national movement that was really popular in 2017 at their lowest point. One of the biggest messages, though, that I felt had to be brought in there was that you can never tell people to check any part of their identity at the door. Whatever that was LGBTQ people, whatever that was Jews, whatever that was people of color, people of different backgrounds. If you tell people they have to check any part of their identity, it's not love, it's not community, and more often than not, you're doing more harm than good.
Okay, so let's look at the flip side. Let's look at the breakthroughs. I'm curious for whoever wants to answer. You don't all have to answer this question. What are the two? You can. You know, I think we're gonna do 2 more rounds of questions before Q&A. That's what I'm gonna try to do. What have been the 1 to 2 most critical breakthroughs for those who've grown up ultra-Orthodox and are seeking to self-actualize? And connected to that, how have you seen the community of leavers, of seekers change over the years? Does someone want to be first? Okay.
Go ahead.
So, and I think I'll try to kind of a little bit kind of, engage Rae's point. And I hope I'm not getting another essay from the guy who, I very strongly believe, I really strongly believe that in terms of self-actualization, there are three groups, I think. I think there are people who have to leave. I think there are people who shouldn't leave. And I think there are people who can leave. What I mean by that is, and I don't know, Lani, I've heard this said in your name, but I don't know if this is someone else, but the line I heard, the best line about Footsteps that I heard is that when someone comes to Footsteps and says, should I leave? The answer is, if you're still asking, the answer is no. You only leave when you know for sure I can't take it anymore. And there are people who have reached a point where they cannot stay within Orthodoxy. This is it for them, and they really have to leave, and they should leave. But there are people who don't necessarily have to leave and give up, all of Orthodoxy. They're looking for modifications, variations, softer Orthodoxy, more accepting Orthodoxy, more moderate Orthodoxy. And I think that's really where the difference between what you're talking about and what I'm talking about, which is, if someone wants to completely leave, I don't think the Haredi community is going to ever accept them, and the acceptance is false. And there's manipulative, and it's love because hopefully it'll come back, and so on and so forth. And that's outrageous. What I think has changed is, for those who are coming along and say, I'm not going to give up everything, but, I want to go to the movies. I want to hold my spouse's hand when I walk on the beach. That has changed significantly in the last 30 years, in the sense that there is an appreciation for people that, you can hold the line for everybody all the time. And I think that's a good change. And I think the other piece that's very hard and difficult is that, I'm remarried with 2 beautiful children. My wife grew up modern Orthodox, and is very smart, too smart. She drives me crazy.
You married up.
I did marry up, right? And when I meet people who want to talk about leaving, my wife always tells me, Ysoscher, tell them the truth. They can't do it financially. And what I mean by that is, the financial cost of living outside of the Haredi community is so impossible. I pay tuition a year. My kids go to Ramaz now. I pay tuition a year for my kid, one of my kids, more than I paid for my son who grew up in the Haredi community, his entire education. So, sometimes leaving is just an impossibility because of what happened and the way they were raised and all of that. So, I think, is the community become better for people who want to leave completely now? Has the community become better when we talk about gradations of leaving? I think that has become significantly better, and it is good for those who don't want to leave, and also for those who shouldn't leave because they don't know the means, they don't know the resources. Can they stay and get somewhat of what they were looking for? For that, the answer is yes.
We do one other comment on this. Who feels like they really want to answer this question? Okay, everyone wants to. 2 minutes. Can people try 2 minutes each? Critical breakthroughs for people who are leaving and how the community of leavers has changed.
I promise
people
I'm
who
going to
left.
answer that, but I want to respond to Ysoscher's comment about the cost of modern Orthodoxy. So what I've observed is when couples, families who leave, they tend to leave and go straight to public school. There aren't that many who are interested in remaining in some form of, Orthodox Jewish community. So I think that solves that problem. I mean, my kids are in Jewish school, so I come at this from a very, no, I'm not objective at all. Sorry. Okay. So I think the 2 most critical breakthroughs, I think one of them is the chutzpah of the younger generation, I think. I think the younger generation, the Zoomers, my children's generation, they're not taking any more of this bullshit. Excuse my French. The other critical breakthrough is, we have to mention Footsteps. I swear they did not put me up to this. But Footsteps was tasked with shining a light on the plight of the OTD community, and they did really well in the last 10 years. They brought awareness to this issue, and as a result, without Footsteps, we might not have had the number of OTD people that we have, and the number of disaffected, individuals in the community, and we wouldn't need an Abby Ysoscher. So Abby Ysoscher has to thank Footsteps for this. But I personally think that Abby Ysoscher and the work that he does is one of the critical breakthroughs in the community. We can disagree about it, and we can parse it another time, but.
Can I get
Copy that with Footsteps, by the way, and I think one of the specific things that definitely has changed is the fact of people surviving. I can't tell for anyone else, but I wouldn't be anywhere remotely where I am without Footsteps, and that's, again, no one put me up to it. It's just a reality. It's really, really, I can't imagine being anywhere. Forget about, I went to Columbia, writing a book, doing what I'm doing. Simply being alive in whatever way it is, wouldn't have happened without it. But I actually want to go specifically to the second part of your question, how does the community of people leaving change? And what I've seen even since I have left, and I'm the last person who is into Kiruv. I honestly couldn't care less if someone, Kiruv outreach, yeah. I don't care if someone leaves and never does anything Jewish again, or if you leave and then you become Christian or Muslim or Buddhist. I honestly don't care. But what I have found to be really powerful is more people, even since I joined in 2012, who are looking at parts of their background and being, oh, I like this, but I hate that part. I want to eat bacon for breakfast, but then I really want to eat challah on Friday night. And I want to celebrate Passover right now. And tomorrow, I want to go and have a slice of pizza. And not just being okay with that, but knowing, I personally believe that that's beautiful. And the reality is that you have millions of Jews out there that live like that. But when I joined Footsteps even, it was, I don't know if that was just the image that I got, if it was really like that, and at least for a lot of people who used to leave, and I think Ysoscher, you were a bit of an outcast, not in a negative way, but in that side of, you actually stayed. Most people leave, and then it was all or nothing. And even in the community, like, my dad was so confused when in 2014, for the first time, I went to a community called Romamu, some of you know, a very progressive Jewish renewal community, and I read the Haftorah on Yom Kippur, and my dad saw a video of it, and it was live music, a woman rabbi, mixed seating, and he's looking at that, and he's like, why would you do that? I would rather you don't do anything, while knowing that the year before my Yom Kippur consisted of going on a camping trip, where he saw my receipts, and part of the menu had pork and bacon, and he would rather I did that, he could make more sense of that, than for me going to a progressive Jewish community. Yet by now, and again I think partially thanks to Footsteps, specifically the funding that we get like on holidays to host stuff and so on, we have created, and hopefully we'll talk a bit more about that if it comes up, but we have created this new Jewish community, which is sometimes very, very Jewish in our own way, and it's just so freaking beautiful. I just love it.
I have a watch, so I know what 2 minutes is. It's gonna be good.
Thanks, Boomer.
You're welcome. It's Casio. So the breakthroughs, like everyone was talking about, yeah, it's community. It's the things that we've all built together. It's incredible, and what gets me really excited is that I think we're on the side of possibility that we weren't before. You know, we used to have to really work to survive, and I've spoken about I think I've spoken about this here, that the Hasidic community has moved for their warfare. They've moved from survivalist to ideological. Well, so have we in our path of creating this world for ourselves. We no longer need to struggle to survive as much. Some of us do, and that's important to remember that not all of us have that luxury, and it's a privilege that a lot of us are in a place where we can survive and be stable comfortably. And because we have that to bounce off of, because we have each other, we can do the ideological work that we need to be doing, like dismantling racism and dismantling misogyny, because that's so deeply ingrained in the worlds that we come from, and we couldn't talk about it when we needed desperately to eat food and pay rent and pay bills and like just deal with the deep pain and trauma of being pushed out of our families. That wasn't possible to do, but it is possible to do that work now, and that's something that really excites me.
Thanks. I think I want to stick with the possibility and the hope side of this. In our prep call, we landed on the concept of pride shifting over the years, and I'm curious if one or two of you wants to talk about that shift that we landed on when we were conceiving of things we wanted to talk about on this panel.
Abby, you want to take it, Abby?
I just love pride. I have, one of my favorite mottos has been, whenever people tell me, why don't you just move on? Whatever it's with Judaism or with gender, and I've been very active in the Jewish community, and I've done probably 400 or 500 speeches over the past 3 years. Half of them at least, if not more, have been within Jewish communities. And people are like, why don't you just move on? Like, okay, fine, you didn't want to be religious and just go and do your thing. Or like gender, why do you have to keep talking about it? And I always tell people, you're right, we got to move on from talking about tolerance to talking about celebrating, talking about pride, because our lives are beautiful. And I'm not just saying that because it's nice. And I know it's from my own experience, but more importantly from seeing. When I see even something like One of Us, for example, like a documentary that I had the opportunity to get involved when it was produced, and yes, it is a sad story. There are parts of it, they are about survival. But now so much of it is, we are here, we are thriving. I see this response over the past few months with my book, and I've been talking to thousands of people, and that is the reaction that keeps coming, that we're not just surviving this, we are thriving and creating this beautiful community that, quite frankly, I think that is something that a lot of people who are here as allies or as here as supporters need to also understand. This community, this beautiful community that does not fit into the Orthodox Conservative Reform, Reconstructionist, even renewal boxes that so many people have of the Jewish community, but that is part of what makes it so beautiful. It's part of, one of the questions that I get a lot, I can say almost at every event, if you could choose to have been either born as a girl, or born in a different body, or born in a different community, would you? And I'm like, I don't know. Because at the end of the day, so much, yes, even the hardship, yes, struggling with transphobia and homophobia and racism and people not understanding and anti-Semitism, with all of that, the reality still is that I am where I am today, where I'm really happy and proud of where I am because of all of my experiences, not just despite it, but because of it. And I believe that every single person here, specifically the ones who also grew up in our communities, and the fact that you are here today, it's pride. It's for you to show up, not just having left, but to show up and being like, these are people that I want to talk to, whatever the reason is that you came here today. We have created something unique and beautiful that I couldn't have been prouder of.
Thanks, Abby. I'm going to ask Frimet's going to go, and I am going to do one more question. I just want to ask our collector, Leon, and if there's another staffer that's close on this side, if they want to collect cards so that Leon doesn't have to run up two sets of aisles, that would be great. So start to pass your questions towards the closest aisle, and we're going to do another round as that's happening. This is the advice round. There are two main audiences in the room here today. And so I want to ask each of you, and take a minute to think before you answer. This one wasn't fully prepped. If you had one piece of advice that you want to offer your fellow travelers, those who have been on a similar journey to yours, having grown up ultra-Orthodox and no longer practicing that way and living that way, what would it be? And one piece of advice to our friends, allies, supporters in the room.
Thanks, Lani. So one piece of advice, it's going to be a long one, I'm sorry. For folks who are fellow travelers, I would say is find community outside of this room.
Yeah.
And what that looks like is find community that didn't come from the cult that you came from. Find community that isn't Jewish. Find people who you can learn how to communicate your experience to from the starting point of zero. Because something that we have with each other, which is a double-edged sword, is we have this really deep bond that is layered with a lot of trauma and is layered with a lot of trust that comes inherently because we know each other, we see each other. And I was chatting with my sister about this, and she calls it inside joke culture. It's when everybody gets the joke. We don't need to explain the joke.
The tuna bagel?
The tuna bagel? Yeah.
There, all right.
It was okay. I mean, I'm Lubavitch, so I'm not gonna say tuna bagel like that well. So sorry, everybody. But yeah, it's this inside joke culture means that we don't have to work to understand our own experiences. And when we do that work, we can really take ownership of who we are, and we can also set ourselves apart. Because that's something that I've noticed personally is a thing that I needed to do growing up as a soldier in Hashem's army. I never made it very far, just, there are rankings. I never made it very far with the Tzivos Hashem. It's probably the reason I really left. But you're just a soldier. You look the same way. Everybody wears the same clothes. There's this joke that you can spot everybody in the room just from the way their hair looks. We need to be set apart, and we also need to be understanding how we show up to the world by creating these connections, by building with other people. We need to be doing that work. And then to supporters, I would just say, stop asking how my relationship with my mom is. I don't want to tell you. Yes.
Respectfully. Thanks, Rae. It's complicated, Rae said in the past. How's yours?
I love what you said, everything, literally. Specifically, finding community. I also want to say, and I don't remember, and Frimet doesn't remember that article, but I remember someone wrote once an article about Footsteps that the title was The Community of Exes. I thought it was you.
Yeah, it might have been.
I think it was you. I think it was you, and I remember that, which was so much of what brings us together is...
After our 10th anniversary, yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you remember it. Yeah, I didn't make it up. Okay, great. Which is that so often what brings us together is who we are not as opposed to who we are. Find communities that bring you together for who you are. And I wanna point out OTD Meetup, formerly OTD Meetup, currently Freedom, that Jean started, which has been, I had the honor to be at the first OTD Meetup event, and at the last one, and at the first Freedom event, which has been a good opportunity. And they are, whatever, it's a movie night, a game night, or whatever it is, you can find things that are more than just coming together, and it could be a good jumping set. Oh, you like movies? Great. Find community for something that you do like. And talking of that, and I want to say one other part, which is also going to relate, I think, to our supporters. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember Lani told me once that the majority, is that wrong? The majority of Footsteps supporters are Jews who are not Orthodox. So I have been...
Who are not ultra-Orthodox.
Who are not ultra-Orthodox, yes.
I just want to make that...
I meant members of the broader Jewish community,
Yeah.
however you define it, yes. The reason why I'm saying that, because I think that the next part is both advice to people who have left, and then in turn for people who are members of these broader Jewish communities. So I have been, in one way or another, successful at finding my place, finding community in broader Jewish communities, and I'm extremely proud of it. I have worked professionally with and for every Jewish denomination. I used to teach in a Hasidic yeshiva back in the day. I worked at Camp Ramah and at Eden Village, and I taught at Reform day schools and at Reconstructionist day schools. I have worked at humanistic synagogues. I have done the whole thing. And what I have learned that in the beginning, and what I hear from a lot of people who are Footsteps members or people who have left the community, who sometimes want to find a community, because sometimes, you want to celebrate Passover, whatever it is, because you think the music at the Reform Temple you go to is beautiful, or you're nostalgic, which is still beautiful and still fine. And so many people still feel that you walk into the room and you're exoticized. Very similar to what you said. And we have that very similar in the LGBTQ community, which is like, oh, you are trans? Okay. How were you when you knew? Were your parents okay when you came out? Have you had surgeries? Have you done that? Which gets really annoying. And it's not just annoying, but it also pushes people away. And I know a lot of people who have tried, and even for me, some communities, you feel like the only thing that, these conservative community next to your house that you started going through, the only thing they're interested in is your very exotic story that you have. And a lot of non-Hasidic Jews have this weird fascination with Hasidic Jews that goes from exoticizing to demonizing, but still a very interesting fascination. And the reality of what I have learned is, and the advice that I want to say, if that's what you want, you don't have to be a member of any Jewish community, but if you want, talking from experience, stick around. We say it gets better or it gets better. It really does. And ultimately, if you stick around to a community, you will find community, and it becomes very helpful and supportive. Sorry? Maybe saying I should stop, but I want to say one final part to the people, who are supporters. Obviously, yes, tune down the exoticizing, and we get it. I'm not stupid. I know people are curious. I know people are curious what I have between my legs. I'm not stupid. Hopefully none of you are going to ask me that, but I get it. I'm not stupid. Of course, people are curious how your family reacts to you. But in a positive note, we, people who have left the Hasidic community, are some of the most educated, creative Jews that you are going to find. If you run a Hebrew school, if you run a Jewish nonprofit, anything outside of the ultra-Orthodox world, you have some of the most well-educated Jewish educators or camp counselors or whatever you can find that you're going to find in the Jewish community. And we can so many of us can use the jobs, but it's beyond. You're not just doing us a favor. I think we're doing you a favor more than the other way around, because we have so much to offer to the broader Jewish community. So yeah, don't exoticize, but on the positive part, we have a lot to offer, and so many of us want to offer that. So take us up on it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Abby.
How do I follow that? So I usually tell newcomers to the scene to create some distance, which I know contradicts what I said earlier about my sister and having her son at home and how wonderful that is. Create some distance. Allow yourself and your family the grace of transitioning on your own without being in their face, without them being in your face. And my second piece of advice for fellow travelers is to not give in to that listlessness, to that ennui, that need to fill a void. You leave the community, you are no longer told what to do. Everything is predetermined. You know when you're going to get married, how many kids. I mean, hopefully you'll have many kids, but you know exactly what you will do. You're told everything is prescribed for you, and then you leave and you have to find a way. You have to fill that void. And many of us feel like we're shouldering the burden of becoming something, of proving something to ourselves, to the people we left behind, and I'm telling you, you do not have to prove anything to anyone. You don't have to be the quintessential success story. You are a success story. It's okay to live a simple life. You don't have to be the next doctor, lawyer, writer, whatever. Just live.
Thank you. Thanks, Frimet. You're all leaders. Every single person who's left is a leader.
I don't have much that hasn't been said yet. I'm just going to echo what has been said, although I'm going to say something contradictory, is that on the one hand, as someone who is still deeply involved in the Jewish community, is fascinated by the diversity of the Jewish community, I feel that we're heading to the direction of when the people who are the former Orthodox community has such critical mass that they will create this new unique denomination. I think there's going to be, I don't know, Orthodox, conservative, reform, and OGB or whatever you want to call it, because they bring to the conversation something so unique and so fascinating that I think we are really heading towards something incredibly phenomenal. When the numbers keep increasing, it will be its own unique version of the spectrum. What I'm going to say contradictory is just echo what Abby said, and I really want to talk to the donors in the room, if they're here or they're not here. Every Jewish community across the spectrum, and I'm going to bash my own community, my Orthodox community. The minute you bring in a person who is formerly Orthodox, the intellectual, textual, and cultural proficiency skyrockets. It has changed dramatically just because you bring in people who have a deep knowledge of Torah, a deep knowledge of Jewish culture, and the entire culture changes. And I really cannot encourage more any institution, reform, conservative, non-denominational. Bring in those people, bring in our children. They will give you way more in return than what you want back from them. And really, if there are donors out there, we really can make a difference if we can make an effort.
And I'll just add, if they want to be brought in, you should bring them in.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's not so obvious. Also,
I can give
yeah.
advice to supporters.
Sure.
You don't have to add anything to it.
You don't have to, but if you have something
I
new to
just
add,
want you all to know that none of us own the OTD narrative. So whatever you read, we are all individuals. We clearly have very different opinions representing here, a spectrum. And I don't own the narrative, and Abby doesn't, and Ysoscher doesn't, and Rae doesn't, and we all have our unique experiences and our unique stories, and just keep looking for more of ours.
Thanks. Keep listening. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to go to my first question. If there are more, feel free to pass them down. We have 20 minutes. I know it's late. Thanks for sticking with us. Okay, to Rae. I'm gonna send you a question that I believe you've gotten before. All right. While conditional, unconditional love is not optimal, wouldn't you agree that a child not getting kicked out without a roof over their head is better than the alternative? Also, how is that black and white either or view different than the black and white mentality of the ultra-Orthodox? Just pitching you a curveball there.
Love it. This is great. So, thank you, whoever wrote that question. It is better that people have a home. It is better. And I think that it's hard to get into nuance when you have 2 to 3 minutes to answer a question. So I didn't. But now I can. So yes, it is absolutely better for folks to be able to live at home and not be kicked out. But what that actually can do is that I'll use an anecdote of some friends of mine. So I have some friends who were kicked out at 18 because they were caught doing things that they shouldn't have been doing, watching TV on a Saturday. Just gonna put that out there. That's what they were kicked out for. And they struggled and stayed inside of the bounds of the community. They rented from Hasidic folks and were able to get affordable rates. And then after a few years, they fixed their relationship with their parents enough so that they felt they could move back at home and save some money, and that was great. And yeah, that was a good choice for them financially. Financially, that was a great choice. What's happened now is that this person is unrecognizable as the person I knew who made their own choices. This person doesn't necessarily make their own choices anymore. They have folded to the will of their parents. And it's not because their parents said that you can't live here if you are doing the things you're doing, because, you know, they still live at home. Now they break Shabbos openly, not openly, but their parents know they break Shabbos and it's okay, and they wear what they want to wear, unless of course their family comes over, and if they do want to bring any like food home that they went out to eat, they'll have to hide it, and if they, you know, want to have a partner over, they'll have to do it when nobody's looking, and that breaks down the will to live a self-determined life. And that makes it so that people do not make their own choices. And personally, I think that it's better to struggle in a way that's financial and with Footsteps' support, because we love to support folks. You know, we can make it. There's so many of us who make it, and once we do get to that stability on our own, we're able to really lean into creating our own lives. And you don't get that when you're living in your parents' home. It just doesn't happen.
So this is going to be a point of debate. People are going to have different opinions on it. So, Rae, thank you for offering some nuance on that. Yeah. So a question, would you recommend telling, I'll add, ultra-Orthodox relatives that you went to a Footsteps convening, i.e. just to educate them about your interests? Who wants to take that one? These do not have to be answered by everyone, so.
One word?
Okay, Abby and then.
Depends. Depends, that's all I can say.
So I think this is an important
Just
piece
use the mic,
that I
please.
feel is a little bit missing in this panel, is that we're way beyond generalizations. I mean, would it be a good idea? No. For some people it would be great, for some people it would not be great, right? Would it be a good idea for some people to stay at home? For some people it would be horrible, for some people it would be the best. The community has grown way, way, way too big to kind of talk in any general terms about anything, you know? So I don't even know what the question means, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we do want you all walking away with is a more a deeper understanding of the nuance here. And there was intention in bringing a panel of folks together who have diverse viewpoints to show that there isn't one answer. It's going to be nuanced, just like there's a gray in leaving. There's also a gray in people's viewpoints, like, you know, Frimet was alluding to a minute ago.
We even can expand it. Like, just when I said depends, because it really does. Even in my own life, I have two siblings that I talk to. One of them I would tell, and I think it would be really helpful. One of them I wouldn't even hint to it. It depends. It depends on your family. It depends on the person, how they're going to react.
It depends on what you have to lose, also. Don't risk losing, you know, your children for this.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. It's real. Different life experiences. We might have touched on this since this person asked this question, but the question is, can you speak about what, if any, positive identity OTDers have to Judaism, spirituality, community, or in any capacity 5 to 10 years after leaving their ultra-Orthodox communities? Before we go to this crowd, I also do want to name, and I don't know if they're still here, but a newer group that started up, Baruch is here, a couple of years ago, Nitzotzot, here in New York, and with the explicit vision to support people on spiritual journeys who are leaving ultra-Orthodoxy. Nitzotzot. Sparks. There you go. So, does anyone on this panel have anything they want to... positive relationships to Judaism. Abby's spoken to it a bunch, so if people have something... Yeah?
I say yes for Nitzotzot. I've only been to a few events. They're really great.
Hello. So I know many people in our community do have positive relationships to Judaism. I do think it's important that we honor and celebrate the folks that don't. I think it's important that we acknowledge the deep trauma that Judaism through ultra-Orthodoxy has caused on a lot of the folks in our community. And we need to make room, respect, and celebrate and honor that they do not want any relationship with Judaism, with spirituality, and that is okay. I think it's beautiful to have a relationship with Judaism and spirituality as well, but it cannot come at the cost of re-traumatizing people.
I think that's a great point, and 2 years ago, I might have been really upset by that. Because I couldn't find within me the compassion for those who think differently. I still am very attached to my Jewish identity, and I feel that staying connected to my Judaism has helped me and kind of kept me on solid ground for a very long time. And I couldn't understand why anyone would throw out, excuse this, please, it's so hackneyed, like throw out the baby with a bathwater.
So let's not.
Yeah, no. But I think this is where we talk about nuance.
Yes.
Kind of realizing that I can be a picker and chooser. It's okay. It's not hypocritical. Someone recently told me this. That, if you have a strand of pearls, this is going to sound very silly. If you have a strand of pearls and you lose it on a beach, right? It's a valuable strand of pearls and you lose it on a beach. And would you go and pick it up and try to put it back together? And the point of that is that if you have dropped, if you have gone to the other end of the spectrum and you've chosen not to identify as Jewish at all, or not to embrace anything of Judaism, but eventually you decide that you want to pick up a few pearls and put them back together, and that's okay too.
Can I ask a follow-up question there, Frimet? You said something I thought pretty dramatic there, and admitted, some own personal work that you did. And I think that that's really hard to for us to all shed, our preconceived notions of where we're personally coming from, and that is, I think, huge work. I'll say personally that I continue to do every day as executive director of Footsteps. And I'm curious, what work you did to get to a place where you didn't get upset when Rae said that, and offer that perspective up. If you're open to sharing in this context.
I mean, I single-handedly fund all my therapist's vacations. Well, I was forced into it because a good friend of mine is very much an atheist and very much wants nothing to do with Judaism whatsoever, to the point where Hanukkah, she doesn't want to celebrate Hanukkah, but her children force her to. And so I was forced to find compassion for her complete dissociation of, and anything she was raised with.
Yeah. The nice thing about being at the end, the last person, is that everything is smart and exciting and interesting has been said already. All I'm gonna, what? No, all I'm gonna say is that, a variation of what I said before, which is, I'll use an illustration of my own experience. People ask me often, so why did you become modern Orthodox? You left ultra-Orthodox, you became modern Orthodox. And it depends what they ask me. Monday I might tell you that I don't know how to translate it in English, but I'll say it in Yiddish. I saw the light, modern Orthodox is the answer. And then Tuesday I'll tell you that I just simply ran out of gas. I just didn't have to collect anymore. I was tired, and this is where the car broke down. I decided to stay there. And both are true. Both are true. And I think that we need to be generous with ourselves in terms of, do you care about Judaism? Is Judaism important for you? it might be important for you one day and another day not. I mean, my teacher, Moriva Rabbi in pedagogy, is this woman, Ruth Fagan. I don't know how many of you know her. Ruth Fagan has taught me anything about what I know about from pedagogy, really my Rebbe. And she loved to tell always the story about this kindergartner who the teacher asks a question and the kid raises the hand and gives an answer, and the teacher said, "That's not what you said yesterday." And the kid says, "Okay, so I disagree with myself." That's a big deal. And we need to be generous with ourselves to know I might love Judaism today and wake up tomorrow and say this is a crock, and vice versa. You just got to be generous with your own self, and there's no story that you need to have.
Thank you. Okay, we're running out of time. I have, if you each had just one, you could take 30 seconds each to say, if there was one place and one thing that you wanted to change in the next 5 years to support people in their pursuit of a self-determined life who grew up ultra-Orthodox, what would it be? Oh. Okay. Ysoscher and
I would like to see more women in the OTD community.
more women. Take the mic. Take the mic, because people can't hear it.
I mean, I just would love to see more women in the OTD community. I mean, the fact that there are more women than used to be is a sign of self-determination, and the more the merrier. That's all. I just hope the numbers increase significantly.
I want to see more stories written, more essays, more in whatever way. Just bring, tell your stories. They're important.
Plug interview booth. Seriously, it's happening.
No, it's not.
It's not.
12 to 6.
Oh, sorry. I was told it's open till 8:30. Wrong.
It's open till 8:30.
It's open till 8:30. Hey, Yael knows more than me.
Where is it?
4th floor. See if it's still open. Okay.
Wow, thank God so much. I have this vision of a community center, and I think I'm basing it a lot on something that I saw in Israel when I was in Jerusalem over the summer, where they started a thing called Barata, and anyone who's a Stan people follow them on Facebook, which is a group of people who have left the Ultra-Orthodox community, not affiliated with Hillel, though a lot of people are members, and they've created this space which is it's kind of like freedom in a space, so to speak. It's like, I don't know how to really define it. I think a lot about it. It's this concept where people could just come. It's not support groups. It's not drop-in groups. It's simply come, sing, eat, do whatever you want, but kind of on a weekly basis. It's like having like a JCC or non-Jewish CC, whatever you want to call that, for the OTD, formerly Orthodox, Footsteps, whatever you want to call that community.
I would like to see more accountability for OTD men being misogynistic inherently. And I would like more spaces and homophobic and transphobic and racist, but we're all dealing with online racism, so we can do that too. I would like to see more spaces for femmes and queer youth and our youth to grow and heal inside of. That's all. That's the whole thing.
Thanks, Ray.
I'm just gonna get up to close, because if you might not have noticed, okay, everyone stretch. We're in the final 3 minutes. All right, it's been a long day, and there is storytelling after dinner if you want to continue hanging. We do know that there are some people who are gonna leave, and I want to offer a few closing remarks. I first want to thank these wonderful panelists. And let's have the whole entire staff and board of Footsteps has been hugely supportive of this endeavor. A special thank you to Yael Reisman, Did they land?
Oh, they should.
It landed. Okay, you've been checking your email. I told you not to. But now you can check to see if the evaluation is in there. If you did not pre-register, then it's not in there. So we will get it to you soon. And even better, you could reach out and ask us, where's the link to the evaluation? So we'll get, to the folks who just showed up, thank you for showing up. And we'll get you an evaluation. We really want to hear your feedback. This is the first time we've ever done this. So those are my logistics. So why did we do this today? We hope that over the course of the day, you've learned more about the multitude of experiences that make up the formerly ultra-Orthodox movement and feel more connected to this community, have more nuanced questions, whether it's as a community member, an ally, a fellow traveler, whatever your orientation to this, we hope it's left you questioning more and seeing that there is no black and white answer. We also hope that you're leaving this community, this convening today, inspired and empowered to advocate for the interests of the formerly ultra-Orthodox. If you learned about an organization today, and there were some amazing organizations that were highlighted, especially first thing in the morning, so if you weren't here, please take a look at our program, look up their websites, and there are more out there. We hope you'll reach out to that group and see how you can get more involved. If you learned about an issue that you want to better understand, reach out to us. You could reach out to Yael to ask for resources. She's our one-woman show on this set of issues, but she'll work on getting back to you as soon as she can in terms of connecting you up with resources that may or may not be on our website, but in other places too. There are amazing perspectives on all the issues that were thought about today. Think about 2 or 3 people. Close your eyes and think about 2 or 3 people that you want to have a conversation with about something you learned today. A shift in your perspective, a new question. And if you're inspired to do so, of course, we can use your support financially. Please consider doing that and or supporting any of the amazing groups that were also represented here today. On behalf of all of us at Footsteps, the staff, the board, I want to thank you for being a part of this momentous occasion and for being part of choice and change.